to unnaturally hold books on the opposite side. I know I complain about the same things every video. It's the same things that trip me up every time. What's his name? Sorry, I've forgotten the character's name. Shiraha, excuse me. Hi everyone, it's me, Jess. Oh, it's a scorcher. I mean, it's a hot day. Like I'm verklempt. It's so hot. No, but really, it's like, I think it's a heat wave kind of a day. It's like 30 degrees or something. Humidity is off the charts. And I just chose today to come on and talk about books, which is fine. I'm just, excuse my sweatiness. So I have read a lot of books in the last couple months, and I didn't have an opportunity to come on and talk about any of them. It's been a busy couple of months. I moved both of my parents. They both moved in the beginning of June. And that just took up all my time, all my energy. And then it was also end of the semester, so I had, normal end of semester duties, marking and all of that good stuff. So I just didn't have an opportunity. So I'm going to start today talking about some of the books that I read in, I guess it's kind of a wrap up for April, May, a late presentation of my wrap up for April, May. And I had these kind of ambitious TBRs that I talked about in my TBR video for May and my TBR video for June. And some of those books got read and some of those books didn't get read, which I think is the normal practice. So without further ado, let's get into the books. The first book that I wanted to talk about, which I don't know, I guess I'm late to the party with Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is kind of more like a novella than it is a full novel. And it's a reflection by a woman named Keiko, who works in a convenience store. And she's worked in a convenience store. It's really the only job that she's ever had. And she's worked there, I think, for 18 years. And she's in her mid-30s. And she really prides herself on the work in the convenience store. Throughout the book, it's as if her identity is very clearly tied in. There's a little bit of her identity is tied into her role as a convenience store worker. And there are also parts in the book where it's almost as if she is like one with the convenience store, which I guess makes sense as a commentary on, some people's profession and how they feel about their profession. And I think there's a point being made here that not only certain professions give you that kind of satisfaction of giving you a sense of identity. And, it doesn't necessarily just have to be a profession, but that a job like this job that she has in the convenience store can also give you a sense of identity. However, this is not something that is really accepted in our society. Like, it's not considered to be normal. There's a lot of references in the book to what's normal and what's abnormal. And Keiko is definitely perceived by her family and particularly her sister and her sister's friends, as being odd or abnormal. And even the other people who work at the convenience store are a little bit more transitory. They come and they go. And I think a lot of them also maybe think she's a bit odd. So not to give too much of the story away, but she eventually meets a man who comes to work at the convenience store, and he strikes like a deal with her where they help each other to be perceived as normal by pretending that they're a couple. Sort of strange, sort of odd, but there's definitely this underlying idea or theme that in order to be normal in society, you have to be, as a woman, married, as a man, married as well, so works both sides. And, he also has a lot of philosophical kind of comments and perceptions about society, and how, the only way to fit into society is if, as a man, you're the provider and you have a family and you have a wife. So there really is a good exploration in this book about, gender identities, and also what is a meaningful life, what is a life that is valued by others in society, in addition to what is a meaningful life for the person living the life. Because again, Keiko is really finds her life as a convenience store woman to be very, very meaningful, if not even like, consumes her sense of herself, her sense of identity, and her whole kind of raison d'etre. So I very much enjoyed this, and I would recommend it. I think it has a lot of interesting things to say. I mean, it does have kind of a dark, kind of depressing kind of undertone, because of, it forces us to think about society and how we try to fit into these molds of normality in our society. And when we don't fit into those molds of normality, that we either feel othered, or we are othered by, other members in our family or other members in our community. There's just an excerpt, for example, where she comments on her sister after. So she's gotten together with this character, Shiraha, the male character who proposes this idea to her. And her sister is like really happy that she has a boyfriend, and she seems to be like, not as abnormal as she thought she was, and she's fitting into society. And she says, Keiko comments about her sister that she's far happier thinking her sister is normal, even if she has a lot of problems, than she is having an abnormal sister for whom everything is fine. So that's a kind of interesting commentary, because her job at the convenience store is one that she feels, I think, that she has a lot of control over, and she doesn't feel like anything is lacking in her life as a result of working in the convenience store. So yeah, I thought this was a great little, very quick read. And she talks about how she doesn't really relate to any of the emotions that other people have at the store. Like, if someone's angry but she doesn't feel angry, she just goes along with everybody being angry, for example. There's a lot of interesting commentaries about human interaction and how we, maybe like for me, what I got from it was like just kind of how out of touch we actually are with how we really are interpreting our environment, or how we're feeling emotionally, and how heavily influenced we are about how we're supposed to interpret our environment, and how we're supposed to respond emotionally to different experiences that we have. The nurture aspect, nurture over nature over nurture, nurture over nature. Anyway, very good. I recommend it. This is The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. I really enjoyed this read. It came out as a new release. I think it came out in February, and it's a sci-fi thriller. I would say, yeah, it's a little bit more sci-fi than thriller, or mystery. I don't know. It's super well written, and it's the story of Evelyn Caldwell. Yes, Evelyn Caldwell, who is a scientist, and her life's work has been to create clones. And she has devoted her life really to creating clones. And the point of the clones that she makes is that they be used in situations where, for example, someone very important politically is giving a speech, and they want to use a clone so that if their life is threatened, then the clone dies and they don't die, or for scientific research, or for advancing the treatment of diseases, for doing that kind of research. Although obviously the ethics with any kind of cloning are questionable. But the point about the ethics that's raised in this book has to do with, for clones that are not used for a short-term purpose, which is the original idea behind, or justification around cloning for Evelyn's work, in that she gets a call one day from a woman named Martine, who is married to her ex-husband Nathan. And when she gets this call and she's asked to help this woman Martine, and when she goes to Nathan's house to help her, she discovers that she's a clone of herself. So her ex-husband Nathan made a clone of herself, whom he then married. And this version of herself, Martine, it looks like her, talks like her, but is very differently behaved than she was. So Martine is programmed to be very obedient, to be non-ambitious, to want to have children, which Evelyn didn't want to have children. So it appears that Nathan stole Evelyn's research and made a clone, and then married that clone and made the clone to his specific requirements. So that's the kind of background to the story. And when Evelyn arrives to Nathan's house, Martine is like covered in blood, and it turns out that she killed Nathan. And that's where the story starts, essentially. Like, that's kind of the beginning of the plot. And I'm not going to give away too much of the plot, but in the end, Evelyn and Martine decide to help one another. The reason being that it's in Evelyn's best interest that people don't find out about Martine, because it's a clone that was made based on her research that isn't existing in the world in the way that these clones and the funding for these clones was intended. So, and that brings up a lot of ethical questions. And the characterization is excellent, and it's really interesting to watch Martine's character, because she is living a full life, and she's asking herself, like, why does she want the things that she wants? Is it because she's evolving, or is it because she was programmed to want those things, like her own identity? This clone seems to be struggling with, and Evelyn also seems to struggle a little bit with her identity and what it is that she's doing with all of her life's work making these clones, and the ethical questions around it. So I'll leave it at there. I'm not going to reveal too much more of the rest of the plot. I think that's enough, perhaps, to tantalize. I will say that I really enjoyed this book. It's not like, it's a page turner in a sense, but it's not got like a lot of those, windy twists and turns. It has a fair share of twists and turns. But I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was really, really well written, and I thought it was interesting and different, something different than what I've read before. So I definitely recommend this one, The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. I'm recommending everything I read. I don't know, maybe it's just that I read things that I'm interested in reading. I mean, I guess you can always have disappointments, but I feel like there's only one or two where I was kind of disappointed by them. And I don't know, usually the case where I'm disappointed by a book is because it's been really heavily hyped. I think the reason why The Echo Wife, I enjoyed it so much, is because I really didn't know anything about it, and it hadn't been hyped for me. So it was really fun to get into that one and kind of discover something a little different from what I've been reading. Okay, so the next book that I want to talk about is a book that I was really excited to read because I'd seen the HBO documentary, and I talked about it in one of my TBRs. It's I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle MacNamara. This is such a well-written book. If you like true crime, it's not as technically written as a lot of true crime books are in, telling kind of all the details of the evidence and the crime scenes. It gets a little bit like that near the end of the story, because unfortunately Michelle died during the writing of this book. And it was finished by a couple of the other armchair internet detectives that she was working with to try to solve the case. Basically, I'll Be Gone in the Dark is the telling of the story of the Golden State Killer. Golden State Killer, coined by Michelle MacNamara, earlier referred to his earlier crimes, less violent crimes, although still fairly violent because there were rapes that took place in, I believe, Northern California. He was referred to as the East Area Rapist. And then there wasn't really a connection made between those crimes and then these subsequent murders that happened in Southern California until much later. And so it was Michelle, through all this research and all of these interviews, and she ended up dubbing him the Golden State Killer. And it was just one of those those cold cases that just didn't get a lot of attention and that she became completely obsessed with. Like, she admits in the writing of this book that she became completely obsessed with this. But what makes this book a little bit different is the writing, is Michelle's writing, because she doesn't just write about it in the sense that she's retelling something or explaining what happened. She writes about it in a fictional, with a fictional lens, I guess. And she also writes about the incidents and the events from the perspective of the victims a lot of the time. And so it's quite emotionally written. It feels very intimate, the way that she writes about these crimes. And I think that it was a very humane way to approach her project, and obviously speaks volumes about her character, because she is communicating something in the writing style that she's using. She's making links throughout the book between her own experiences and her own life, and the way she felt at different times about things like relationship with her mother, and then exploring the idea of the relationship between a victim and the loss of their mother. And just, she really brings like this new kind of way of writing about true crime that isn't just about this sensational crime and these terrible things and all the detail and all of the information. She's writing about it more from the perspective of, what did these people experience? What must he have been like? What is his profile? What are the characteristics? Like, it was really a very compelling read. And there's a lot of reflection on, why didn't this person get caught? Why wasn't this investigated? How did this person get away with this? And how it affected the community. So it's also reflected in the documentary on HBO, the same kind of feeling, I guess. But I just wanted to read an excerpt, because there's a little excerpt in the book where she's not actually even writing about the Golden State Killer. She's writing about her own experience in her own neighborhood, after a robbery at her neighbor's. There was a break-in at her neighbor's, a guy named Tony, and she had seen the day before this break-in some characters in the neighborhood that she didn't recognize, and she thought were acting a bit off or a bit strange, but she didn't say anything or do anything about it. And then her neighbor Tony knocks on her door and says, "Hey, we've been robbed. I wanted to come by and tell you guys about it." And she realizes, like, oh, they're our neighbors and we don't even really know them that well. Like, we don't know much about them. And just reflecting on how you can be living in a community, living in a neighborhood, and everybody still really keeps to themselves. And that commentary that by everyone keeping to themselves, you kind of have this problem, because when everyone's keeping to themselves, you can't identify someone or stop someone necessarily that's in your community. And then she's putting her daughter Alice to bed, and I'll just read you this part because I think it's just a good observation, and it gives you a good example of her writing. She writes, "I have a nightly ritual with Alice." Alice is her 4-year-old daughter, "who is a troubled sleeper and has terrifying dreams. Every night before falling asleep, she'll call out for me to come into her bedroom." Very familiar scene, right? "I don't want to have a dream," she says. I brush her sandy hair back, put my hand on her forehead, and look straight into her big brown eyes. "You're not going to have a dream," I tell her with crisp, confident enunciation. Her body releases its tension and she goes to sleep. I leave the room hoping that what I promised, but have no control over, will be true. That's what we do, all of us. We make well-intentioned promises of protection we can't always keep. "I'll look out for you." But then you hear a scream and you decide it's some teenagers playing around. A young man jumping a fence is taking a shortcut. A gunshot at 3 a.m. is a firecracker or a car backfiring. You sit up in bed for a startled moment. Awaiting you is the cold, hard floor and a conversation that may lead nowhere. You collapse onto your warm pillow and turn back to sleep. Sirens wake you later. "I saw Tony walking his big white dog this afternoon," her neighbor, and waved at him from outside my car, in between fumbling for my keys and remembering something I had to do. I still don't know his last name. So I thought that was an interesting commentary. I mean, I don't think she's suggesting that we should be able to do something necessarily about crimes that happen in our neighborhood, but I do think it's interesting because, like, even in my own neighborhood, I've sometimes heard noises And it's so funny because now if I hear weird noises in my neighborhood, I go on Twitter and I'm like, nobody's going to be on Twitter writing about this, but like it's too scary to go outside and see what's going on. And plus she's right, your bed is cozy and your pillow's warm and you're at home and you're safe in your bed. And yeah, it's kind of, I think she's questioning like this idea of how could this have happened in these communities, these families being terrorized by this. I mean, and it's like, I don't know, 50, 100, I can't remember the count of crimes by the end of it, but it's a shocking number of crimes that take place and a shocking number of people affected like for the rest of their lives. So if you like true crime, or even if you don't like true crime, you might want to give this a try. Also, you might want to watch the documentary on HBO if you're curious about it. The book is really, really good, though. Her writing is exceptional, and it's just a shame that she's not with us to write more stuff. It's so sad. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the big one, I guess. I mean, I feel like after I read this book, I had so much that I wanted to say about it, and now a couple months out, I don't feel like I have quite as much to say about it. The book I'm talking about is A Little Life, a big book to describe a little life. And look at all the tabs. I tabbed a lot of stuff in here, and I think, I don't know, how do I feel about this book? I have so many mixed feelings about this book. So I did not cry when I read this book. Nothing in this book made me cry. But after finishing this book, I felt so low. Like it was like my inside, my, I don't know, heart or whatever you want to call it, but the inside part of my chest, which is, open and happy, and it was just like, it just sunk into my stomach. So I didn't cry. There are other books that I've read this year that really made me like weep and weep and weep, very emotional. This book did not make me cry, but it made me feel extremely blue. It was just, it was like more like heart-wrenching than like out and out sobbing. So this is A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. And someone had mentioned in one of the videos that I watched about this book, the many videos that have been made about this book, that the author kind of, did a lot of research on how to write a book that would sort of manipulate people's emotions and make them feel all the feelings, positive and negative feelings. And there were many moments in this book where I felt positive feelings as well. The story is about 4 friends. But I think it's really mostly about one individual character, Jude. He's the central character in the book, and then his relationship with his friends, Malcolm, Willem, and JB. And, what do I want to say about this book? Okay. It's almost 800 pages, and I read it very quickly. So it's extremely well written. This book is well written. There's no denying that. It reads like the pages go. You're engaged, you're involved, you're interested in the characters, and you're interested in finding out what's going to happen to them. You're attached to them, and you're also very engaged in, I think, finding out Jude's backstory, because there's all this allusion to his childhood that's very mysterious, that nobody knows anything about. And I think like a third of the way through the book, I was already able to see where it was going, and some of what it consists of his backstory. So I think from that perspective, it wasn't like surprising in any way. And yeah, so I think it's a harrowing read, and it's harrowing because, I mean, I could give trigger warnings for whatever thing that you could think of in this book. This book is a hard read, and it's not a book that you would recommend lightly to anyone. That's why people don't want to recommend it to other people, because it's a difficult read, and it might be more difficult for some people than for others. But I think it's a bit relentless, It's like, Oh, you thought that was hard to read? Here, read this, then this, then this. Take another. Take another. I'll take another. Take another. What was that from? I think it makes me think of Breakfast Club when he's getting his detentions and he's like egging him on. I'll take another. I'll take another. I feel like this book was like that. Like it was like, oh, you found that difficult? Here's another. Here's another. Here's another. And I think, I don't know if I need to spend my time doing that. Although, that being said, I'm not sorry that I read the book, because I do think it was really good and I think it will stay with me. But yeah, I don't know. I think what I got from this book is that people who are mistreated, some people, and this is just one character's experience of being mistreated, but some people, and not all characters who are mistreated respond the same way. So I guess I'd also say that. But in this case, it really is a representation of when people are mistreated, particularly from a very young age, how it destroys their self-esteem to such a serious degree that it's questionable whether it can be recovered, whether you can actually come back from it. Like, ultimately, the impact of abuse is pretty well represented here, I think. Yeah, I don't think, I would say yes. The impact of abuse is very well represented here. And I think that that's probably an important thing. And I guess beyond this idea of trying to manipulate the readers with getting them to feel different emotions, I think that she is doing something to get people to really look at abuse, understand its impact on the victim, and, kind of come to terms with that. So I think that's valuable, actually. As difficult as it is to read, I think that's a very valuable contribution. I think that's all I'm going to say. If you haven't read A Little Life yet, I'm not going to say I could recommend it to you. Given what I just described, I think you can have a sense without knowing anything about the plot of, what you're going to get when you read it. At the same time, the relationship between the four friends, and in particular the relationship between these two characters, Willem and Jude, and also the character Harold, which is kind of an adoptive father to Jude, are absolutely beautiful and touching. So as much as there is a harrowing aspect to this book, there is also some very beautiful, lovely relationships that are described, that are probably the closest relationships that I've seen written in a long while. And it's very good because normally I read books that are about women and women's experiences and women characters, so I actually really appreciated reading something that was about men, because I haven't had that in a little while, and I thought that was great too. It was good for me to read about men's experiences. So, recommend, again, you have to be ready for some intense, low repercussions, reverberations of reading about painful experiences if you want to read this book. But I think it has certain payoffs as well. And of course, some people really love this book. I wouldn't say that I love this book, but I am very happy that I read it. Okay, this is the last book we're going to talk about today. I've read quite a few more, but I think I'm going to make a part 2 for this, or part 2, part 3. I don't know how many we're going to talk about. So this is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. It's obviously gotten a lot of hype. And I gotta say, I was a little skeptical at first because of all the hype, but I loved this book. I thought it was great. I really, really enjoyed it. The premise of the book is that the main character, Nora, has decided that her life isn't meaningful enough for her and that she doesn't have enough value to contribute to society and that she doesn't want to continue living. So, I think that could be probably really triggering for people who maybe feel the same way. So, I guess there is that concern, but I think it's dealt with in a fairly sensitive way because she is asked to kind of really think about what is driving this decision and what a life is. And I think, like, maybe some of it is very obvious, but I think it's done in this very cool way that I haven't seen before. So the concept is that she goes into some kind of a purgatory, and it's in this purgatory, which is the Midnight Library, where she has the opportunity to live lives not lived before deciding if she absolutely truly does want to end things and not continue with life at all. And so she can pick all of these different parallel lives that she could have lived, and various things happen in these parallel lives with the people that she cares about, good and bad. And she gets to experience being different versions of herself, both good and bad, but I think mostly good, because there's this idea that he's working with, that we all think that if we'd made different decisions, or if we didn't have regrets about choices we've made, what kind of life would we be living? And he handles it very well, because all of the lives that we think are good lives often have negative components in them. And the lives that we think are the best lives maybe are not even completely real or realistic. So I think he does a really good job of handling this idea, and I think the concept is really unique, and I read it very quickly, and I found the way, like, she doesn't linger too long in each of the lives. I think there's some aspects of it that were a little bit underdeveloped, that could have been better developed, but I found it was a really good read, and I liked the messaging. I think the main message that came away from it for me was, he's her neighbor, and she does small little things for him, like take him his medications, and that's in the life that she decides, she's not of any value. And the point that he's making is that all those little things that she does just for her neighbor, in picking up his medications and bringing in his mail, or whatever it is that she does for him, these little tiny little acts of generosity, are very meaningful to him. So whenever you do something that you don't think is worth it, or you don't get a thank you for at any point, and you don't see the impact of, you maybe don't recognize the value in doing those things. And then, but if you could, like, be a fly on the wall and go back, and see what it would have been like if you hadn't have been there to do those things, and what kinds of domino effect that might have had for that person's life. It's interesting to see that a lot of the small things that we do in our lives, the implication is that the small things that we do in our lives have great significance, especially for other people. And that it's a shame that those small things that we do for other people, that we maybe don't even think twice about, we don't understand or recognize or see the impact of those things, or the reward of those things for ourselves. And I thought that was a really cool and interesting message, because it was just a really good reminder. He says, never underestimate the big importance of small things. Mrs. Elm had said, you must always remember that. Because he has to go to a care home, Mr. Banerjee. And Nora wonders what the difference had been. What had forced Mr. Banerjee to go to the care home he'd been determined not to go to? She was the only difference between the two Mr. Banerjees. But what was that difference? What had she done? Set up an online shop, picked up his prescription a few times? I mean, it's interesting. Not to say that his ending up in a care home is necessarily a bad thing for him, but it's just interesting, the impact of small actions on people's lives. So, ending on a positive note, I decided to forego the star rating system, because I would much rather talk about books than rate books. So if you've read any of these books and you picked up on other things that you liked or disliked about them, please feel free to mention them in the comments below, and we can have a little discussion. That'd be super fun in the comments. And if you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up. And if you don't like this video, you can keep it to yourself. And I will see you in the next one. Whew, it is sweltering. I mean, I'm perspiring. Whew. Bye. See you in the next one. I'm not quite sure what the point of this book was at the end of the day. Like, I have a hard time leaving it with, like, what did I get from this? All right, folks, this is the last one for today. Ooh. Oh my God, my hair's a mess too. Oh my goodness. My hair is going crazy. Oh, everything's opposite day. Okay. Can you see the sweat? Oh my god, you can see the sweat on my dress. Ew.